With the digital age heavily upon us, people have become increasingly dependent on their digital assets, whether that's work files, school projects, or even just your photos and videos. Today, everyone wants access to all their files all the time. Now, obviously you have to store these files somewhere, and just as importantly, you have to have a backup. Some people choose to store their files with a third-party cloud provider. Some people choose to just upload their stuff to social media and use that as their storage. But with the way larger companies have handled user data, pass. So to back up all of my files, I've taken it upon myself and built a backup server. Look how cute it is. And the awesome part is that all the software it's running is 100% free. So let's check it out. Okay, so this is my new backup server. Now I wanted this to be as small and compact as possible because essentially this is going to get thrown in a closet somewhere and run 24/7 just to back up my files. And how I did it was I went on eBay and got a combo motherboard CPU RAM deal for about 60 bucks. This is running an old i3. And the beauty of that is that the software we're using, Syncthing, is extremely lightweight, so this server does not have to be a powerhouse. For the storage, I went with two 14 terabyte spinning drives. I'm running them in RAID 1, so the backup server essentially has redundancy, which is what you always want to have. So let's put that away. The hardware is going to change from person to person, but the software we're using is what I want to discuss more. So let me get everything set back up and plugged in, and I'll be right back. All right, my backup server is plugged in right over there, and it should be up and running. I've actually set everything up a couple of days ago just because I had about 2 terabytes worth of data to get synced up, so I wanted to make sure that was all up and running. Now, we will be using a program called Syncthing. Syncthing is an amazing piece of software. Like I mentioned before, it is free, it is also open source, and I am shocked at how well it works. It's also available on Windows, Mac, and Linux, so no matter what operating system you're using, Syncthing will work to sync files between any system you have. So to get started, you're going to want to just go to syncthing.net and download the package and install it, depending on what operating system you're using. Now today I'm only going to be using the Linux version, so I'm not going to go through the entire installation process. Honestly, it's very easy to do. They have a good guide and they'll walk you through it depending on what operating system you're using. So obviously if you're going to want to sync files between 2 or more computers, you're going to want this installed on those computers. So if we take a look at my setup, I'll be switching between 2 screens, and one of those being my backup server and one being my main home server. So on the screen here, you can see this device has this Ubuntu standard PC. This is my home server. This is the VM that I'm running Ubuntu on, which is running Syncthing. Now on this screen, it looks extremely similar, but this is running on my backup server, which is also running Ubuntu. So I'll be switching back and forth, and I'll try to keep a text box down in the corner up top somewhere to make sure you know which box we're looking at. So when you install Syncthing, what it's going to do is it's going to spin up a web GUI, and you'll access that GUI by going to your local host or 127.0.0.1 and the port number, which by default is 8384. And once in here, the GUI is pretty streamlined. There's not a whole bunch of fancy settings that you have to go through to get this working. That's what I like about Syncthing. So the first thing you're going to want to do is decide what folders you want to actually sync. So in my case, I'm syncing 2 folders from my server directly to my backup server. So in that case, let's go to Syncthing on my server and check out the folders I have set up. Now you'll see both of them are already here. I have one called network_HDD server and Plex server. So essentially, this network HDD is my 48 terabyte NAS solution that I have running on TrueNAS, and Plex is my 12 terabyte setup dedicated just for Plex media. So setting up a new folder is extremely easy. You're just going to go to Add Folder, give it a name. A folder ID, it's got to be unique, but I usually just name that whatever the folder label was. And here's where you'll specify the path. So wherever the path is on your machine that you want to share or sync, you'll enter it here. So for sharing, you won't see anything here until you've added a remote device, and we'll get to that in a second. For file versioning, there are a couple of different options. You can go to Syncthing's website and they'll explain more in detail what each versioning does. But I've gone with trash can. So what that does is if a file is deleted, it won't actually delete it. It will keep it in storage for a specified number of days. Ignore patterns. This is where, let's say, if you want to sync a folder, but you know there's specific files in there that you don't want synced. For example, if we don't want any XML files, we could do something like this. And Syncthing would sync the entire folder, but leave out any XML files that it finds. And then advanced, you can specify a couple of different options. Now there's only two that I really change. Watch for changes. This is if you want the box that you're checking this file on or this folder on to watch for changes and constantly poll the file system to see if anything's changed. Most of the time, you're going to want to leave that on. Now, the folder type, there's three options here. There's send and receive, which is the most common, and there's send only and receive only. I'm actually utilizing the send only and receive only, and I'll touch on that in a second. And once you save it, it'll be set up. So let's go into my configuration and show you how I have it set up. So here you can see folder labels, Plex server, folder ID is the same thing. This is where I have that folder stored. So it's in mount/Plex/Plex. For file versioning, I'm not running any file versioning on my server, my home server, but we'll see when I go to the backup, that's different. This is running a send only. And the reason for that is because I'm only going to ever make changes on my home server. And I want those changes to be only sent to the backup server. And you'll see on my backup server that I have it set the opposite for receive only. And that's because I'm not really going to go on my backup server and make any changes. And in the event that something happens for some strange reason where a file's deleted on the backup server, I don't want that pushed back up to my home server. Now we're looking at my backup server, and if we go to those same folders, they'll appear a little bit different. And the first thing you can see is while the folder label and folder ID are the same, the folder path is different. And that's because obviously we have to store the data somewhere on our backup server. And here is where you're going to specify where you want that to be done. Now, I've set up that on a RAID system under my mount file versioning. Now you can see here that I'm actually running the trash can file versioning. I thought I had this set for 30 days, but guess what? It was set to 0. No ignore patterns. And in advanced, you can see, like I said before, this is going to be a receive only. Okay, so how do I actually get my two servers talking to each other? Now that's where this remote devices comes in. And you can see, I'll switch back and forth, but on our backup, you can see we have a server remote device. And on our server, you can see we have a backup remote device. Now there's two ways you can think about linking these computers together. Now the way I like to think about it is, what's the easiest way for one device to find another? And when I say that, I mean my server is always going to be at home and always going to have a static IP address. On the other hand, my backup server, I could deploy it at home and give it a static IP address as well. But what if I want to take that backup server and deploy it somewhere else off site? In that case, obviously I would have less control over the network address it receives and all that good stuff. But no matter what, I always know the network configurations of my home server. So with that said, it's probably easier for my backup server to go out and find my home server. So let's go to our backup server. And so when you go to add remote device, it's going to ask you for a device ID. So in this case, I would go over to my server, actions, show ID. I would copy this address, and then on my backup server, when I go to add remote device, I would just copy that under device ID. Give it a name, I named it server, and then advanced. And this is where you will enter the address of the machine that you're looking for. And this is why I said, let's set it up on the backup device, because it's extremely easy for me to know where my server is. My server is always going to be on 10.0.0.20, so my backup machine will always be able to find it. Now, I know you're thinking, okay, well, you said that you could deploy this in another state and still find it. I have actually set up a VPN tunnel on my network using my pfSense router, so that no matter where I deploy my backup server, whether that's in my own house or in another state, I can VPN back into my home network and I'll be able to see any device on my home network, including my home server. So once you have this set up, you will see a configuration similar to what I see. Obviously, your folders will be different. Your remote devices will be different, but then you're going to want to go ahead and share. So what I'm going to do is actually set up a new folder to show you how it actually shares a folder across devices. So we are on our home server, or our VM running on our home server. And let's say, for example, we want to share this pinger folder. So in that case, I would go to add folder, and that was in home, Ubuntu, pinger. File versioning, I'm on my server. So I don't want any file versioning here. I want my file versioning to take place on the backup. And in advanced, we are on our server, our home server. So we're going to send only. We want to watch for changes and save. So you can see we've created that folder, but it is marked as unshared. And that's probably what you'll see the first time you set up a folder with no remote devices. Once you have a remote device, it'll look extremely similar here. You can just select that, save, and now it is going to share with my backup. When I go to backup, immediately it's giving me a prompt in the GUI saying server wants to share a folder pinger with you, add new folder. This is extremely convenient because I can just select add. It sets up the entire connection for me. It gives it the same name, the same folder ID. All I have to do is decide where I want to store it. We're going to go through the same thing. Obviously, it's shared. File versioning here. We're on our backup, so we're going to use trash can versioning. I don't know. Let's only do this for a week. Backup, so we are receiving only, and save. So it's going to sync, and apparently it was extremely fast, and it's up to date. So let's go and see if we actually have data. And here's all of our files. Now, what if we made a change over here? So let's say, let's add a new file, test.txt. So now we have a test.txt file. And if we go back over here, you can see it's already synced. So that was extremely fast. So if we go in here and look at it, there's nothing in it. So let's go back to our server and say, hello, here is a change. Write that, go over here. Very briefly, it did a sync, and what's cool is if you go in here, it'll show you the last change. So you can see it updated test.txt and deleted the swap file. So if we go into that folder, test.txt, boom, it's updated. It's synced across, and if we wanted to revert that for some reason, we could go in here and go to versions. You can see we can restore it as the original version, which was with nothing in it. We'll restore it, yes, and now here's our test.txt with nothing in it. So that's Syncthing in a nutshell. I am running a pretty simple configuration of it. Like I said before, you can have multiple computers, multiple file systems, and this thing is running extremely well on an old Intel i3 2nd gen 2000 series with 4 gigs of RAM. You don't need anything fancy to run Syncthing, and that's what makes it awesome. I know I covered a couple of things in here that I could probably go into more detail about, including my network configuration, which I do plan on doing a video of. But if you have any questions on anything I went over, feel free to leave them in the comments. I love reading the comments you guys put and the questions you ask. It makes me feel like I'm actually helping out, so feel free to ask away. And if you like this video, be sure to drop a like. Let me know if you plan on using Syncthing or if you're currently using Syncthing and how it's working for you. Be sure to subscribe because we have a couple more things coming that I think you'll enjoy. So see you all in the next one.